Welcome to Module 11, SAP Client Concept. Picture Week 2 of the Acme Manufacturing implementation. A new consultant joins the team. Her first task: update the fiscal year variant in SAP. She logs in, opens SPRO, makes the change, saves it, and the project manager's phone immediately rings. The consultant had logged into the production client, not the development client. A configuration change had just been made directly to the live system with 800 users on it. This mistake, one of the most common on a first SAP project, happened because the consultant did not understand SAP's client architecture. She did not understand what a client is, which client she was in, or why it mattered. In this module, we are going to make sure that never happens to you. By the end of this module, you will be able to do 3 things. First, define what an SAP client is and explain why it exists, including how it differs from the everyday meaning of the word. Second, describe the purpose of the golden client, the development client, the QA client, and the production client in a typical SAP project landscape. Third, explain the difference between client-dependent and client-independent data, and understand why that distinction matters for ABAP developers and basis administrators. In everyday English, client means a customer or organization you work for. In SAP, it means something completely different, and you need to recalibrate your understanding immediately. In SAP, a client is a self-contained, logical partition of the SAP system. It is identified by a 3-digit number, typically 100, 200, or 800. Within one SAP system, you can have multiple clients. Each client has its own master data, its own configuration, and its own transaction data. Data in one client is completely invisible to another client in the same system. The technical reason for this: client-dependent database tables include a field called MANDT, the client number, as part of their primary key. When you log into Client 100, SAP automatically filters every query to only return rows where MANDT equals 100. Client 200 sees an entirely different set of rows, even though both clients physically share the same database. This architecture is what makes it possible to run development, testing, and production environments in separate clients on the same underlying SAP system without data crossing between them. In a standard SAP project, the system landscape consists of 3 separate SAP systems: development, quality, and production. Each system contains one or more clients with specific purposes. The development system, DEV, is where all the work happens. Functional consultants configure in SPRO. ABAP developers write code. Unit testing takes place. Changes in DEV are captured in transport requests and moved to the next system. The quality system, QUS or QA, is the testing environment. Once a transport is approved, basis imports it into QUS. Integration testing happens here. User acceptance testing, UAT, happens here. No direct configuration changes are made in QUS. Everything arrives via transport from DEV. The production system, PRD, is the live environment. Real business data, real users, real consequences. Only tested, approved transports are ever applied to production. Direct configuration changes in production are a serious control violation. Within each system, specific clients serve specific purposes. In DEV, Client 000 is the SAP factory default, read-only reference. Client 100 is where active development and configuration take place. In QUS, Client 200 is where testing happens. In PRD, Client 800 is the live business client. Your exact client numbers will differ per project. Always confirm with the basis team. The golden client, sometimes called the configuration client, is one of the most important concepts in SAP project management and one of the least understood by junior consultants. The golden client is a specific client in the development system that holds only clean, approved configuration. No master data, no test data, no transaction documents. Only the pure configuration that represents the official signed-off state of the SAP system setup. It acts as the master template. Anytime a new client needs to be created, a new test client, a sandbox for a demo, a training environment, it is created by copying from the golden client. This guarantees that every derivative environment starts from the same clean baseline. The golden client has strict rules. You do not test in it. You do not load master data into it. You do not post transactions in it. Every change must be approved, and every approved change is transported out, never made directly. Think of the golden client as a museum. You may look at the exhibits. You may study them, but you do not touch them without authorization, and if you do, you risk contaminating the reference that everything else is built from. This slide summarizes the 4 client types you will encounter across the standard landscape and the rules that govern each one. The golden or configuration client, typically DEV 010 or 020, holds clean approved configuration only. You may configure in SPRO and create transport requests here, but you must never test, create master data, or post transactions. The development client, DEV 100, is where active configuration, ABAP development, and unit testing take place. UAT and real business data are off limits. The QA or test client, Quest 200, is reserved for integration testing and user acceptance testing. Direct configuration changes are not allowed. Any change must arrive through a transport from DEV. The production client, PRD 800, runs live business operations only. Configuration changes without an approved transport are a serious control violation. Knowing which client you are logged into and what is permitted in it is the first line of defense against the kind of mistake described in the opening scenario. Here is where the concept becomes technically important and where a misunderstanding can have serious consequences. Client-dependent data is everything that belongs to one specific client. Configuration settings, master data vendors, customers, materials, and transaction data, purchase orders, invoices, journal entries. A change made to client-dependent data in Client 100 affects only Client 100. Client 200 is completely unaffected. Technically, client-dependent tables include the MANDT field as part of the primary key. The examples on the slide: KNA1 for customers, LFA1 for vendors, MARA for materials, EKKO and EKPO for purchase orders, VBAK and VBAP for sales orders, BKPF and BSEG for FI documents. All carry MANDT and are filtered automatically by the client you log into. Client-independent data is fundamentally different. It is stored in database tables that do not have the MANDT field, meaning it exists at the system level, not the client level. ABAP programs are client-independent. Function modules are client-independent. Data dictionary objects, table definitions, data elements are client-independent. RFC destinations and system profile parameters are client-independent. And here is the critical implication. If an ABAP developer deploys a program to the development system, it is immediately visible and executable in every client in that system simultaneously. If there is a bug in that program, it affects every client. If a basis administrator changes a system-level setting, it changes for all clients at once. This is why ABAP unit testing must be rigorous before transporting, and why basis changes require careful planning. Client-independent mistakes are system-wide mistakes. This comparison table is the reference to keep in mind whenever you are deciding where a change belongs. Client-dependent data has the MANDT field in its database key and lives in one client only. Client-independent data has no MANDT field and is shared across every client in the same SAP system. Functional consultants and business users typically work with client-dependent data, configuration, master data, and transactions. ABAP developers and basis administrators work mostly with client-independent objects, repository code, RFC destinations, system profile parameters. The risk profile differs too. A client-dependent change affects only that client, while a client-independent change affects every client simultaneously. That is why repository transports must always be tested thoroughly before promotion. Customizing transports move client-dependent settings between clients, while repository transports move code between systems. This slide translates the theory into situations you will face on a real project. The first mistake, configuring directly in production, is the same trap from the opening story. Always configure in DEV, test in QUS, and let an approved transport carry the change into PRD. The second mistake is running a client refresh at the wrong moment. A refresh overwrites everything in the target client, so a refresh of Quest during UAT will wipe every test result. Agree the refresh schedule with the project manager and the client IT team before anything is started. On the good practice side, keeping the golden client clean means any new DEV or Quest environment can be spun up reliably at any time. Treat it as a museum. Look but do not touch without approval. Finally, test ABAP rigorously in DEV before transporting. Because repository objects are client independent, a broken program will break every client in the target system at once. Clients do not just exist, they are actively managed throughout the project lifecycle. For operations are important to understand. A client copy, using transaction SCC1 or SCCL, copies the data from one client into another within the same system. SCC1 runs remotely, SCCL runs locally. You can choose which data categories to copy. It is used to create a new test client from the golden client at the start of a project phase. The basis team runs this. A client export and import SCC8 and SCC7 moves a client between systems. It is used to populate the initial QUS or PRD client from DEV. This is a major operation that requires planning. A client refresh overwrites an existing client entirely. If QUS client 200 is refreshed from the golden client before a new testing cycle, all existing test data in client 200 is permanently deleted. This is why you must never store any irreplaceable data in a test client without confirming the refresh schedule. And client delete, SCC5, permanently removes all data from a client. It is used for decommissioning, is irreversible, and requires senior approval. 3 key takeaways to close out the module. First, a client in SAP is a self-contained, isolated partition of the system, identified by a 3-digit number. Data in one client cannot be seen by another client, and it is not the same thing as a customer. Second, the standard landscape has 3 systems, DEV, QUS, and PRD, each with specific clients. The golden client holds clean, approved configuration only, and it is the master template for every other client. Third, client-dependent data belongs to one client, while client-independent data, ABAP code, RFC destinations, system-level settings, belongs to the whole system and affects every client simultaneously. This distinction has real consequences for every developer and administrator. Each project can have different client and system landscape. As a functional or ABAP consultant, one needs to understand the landscape and the clients in use.